Welcome, dear listener. As you settle into the quiet comfort of your space, allow yourself to drift gently into a world far removed from the present. A world shaped by marble temples, echoing theaters, and myths whispered through the centuries. Tonight, we will begin a journey through the rich and enduring legacy of ancient Greece. This journey is not a hurried one. Let each word fall gently into place like a pebble in a still pond. Let the rhythm of history become the rhythm of your breath. Ancient Greece is more than a place on a map or a chapter in a history book. It is an echoing realm of ideas, of art, of gods and heroes, of thinkers who questioned the very nature of reality, and of cities that once pulsed with the heartbeat of a civilization. We begin not with great battles or kings, but with the land itself. Greece, rugged, mountainous, and kissed by the sea. A land of scattered islands and sharp cliffs, of olive trees rooted deep in the soil, and winds that carry the scent of salt and thyme. The geography of Greece shaped its people, independent, seafaring, community-oriented, yet always open to the wider world. As early as the 3rd millennium BCE, this land saw the birth of remarkable cultures. The Minoans on Crete, with their labyrinthine palaces and frescoes bursting with life, and the Mycenaeans on the mainland, known for their strongholds and golden masks. These civilizations laid the groundwork for what would come later. They gave us stories of gods, of labyrinths and monsters, of kings and tragic fates. From the ashes of their decline emerged the Greece we recognize today. The story of ancient Greece is not a single tale but a chorus of many voices. It is the tale of city-states, the polis, each fiercely proud, each with its own way of life. Athens, with its democracy and philosophers. Sparta, with its warriors and discipline. Corinth, Delphi, Thebes, each a thread in the great tapestry. As you listen, you will hear of myths and monuments, of poets and playwrights, of war and wisdom. You will meet the gods of Olympus, walk through the agora, and climb the steps of the Parthenon. You will witness the birth of theater, the debates of philosophers, and the shaping of ideals that echo still in our modern age. But do not worry if you drift off to sleep along the way. The story of Greece is patient. It has waited thousands of years and will still be here when you return. Let your mind wander through time, your thoughts mingling with the sea breeze that once touched the sails of Odysseus and the shores of Delos. So now, breathe deeply. Let the dust of centuries settle around you like a soft blanket. We begin our exploration of ancient Greece, not as tourists, but as dreamers. Welcome to the world of gods and mortals, of marble and myth. Welcome to ancient Greece. To understand ancient Greece is to understand the forces that shaped it from within. Among its many city-states, two names rise above the rest: Athens and Sparta. While each polis was unique, these two stood as symbols of opposing ideals. One, a cradle of democracy, philosophy, and the arts. The other, a bastion of discipline, military might, and austere living. Together, they shaped the legacy of Greece, not through unity, but through contrast. Let us begin with Athens. Located in the region of Attica, Athens was a city that thrived through its openness. Its rocky soil was not ideal for large-scale agriculture, but the Athenians turned their gaze outward, to the sea. With a powerful navy and a vast trade network, Athens grew wealthy, its harbors bustling with goods, ideas, and cultures from across the Mediterranean. This openness extended into its politics. In the 5th century BCE, under the guidance of leaders like Solon and later Pericles, Athens developed what we now recognize as early democracy. Citizens, free men born in Athens, gathered in the assembly to debate laws, elect officials, and steer the course of their city. It was far from perfect. Women, slaves, and foreigners were excluded. Yet the idea that ordinary men could govern themselves was revolutionary. Athens became a beacon for intellectual life. It was home to Socrates, who questioned everything, to Plato, who imagined ideal forms, and to Aristotle, who sought understanding in nature and reason. Drama flourished in grand amphitheaters, where the tragedies of Aeschylus and Sophocles and the comedies of Aristophanes stirred laughter, reflection, and tears. Now, let us turn our gaze to Sparta. Nestled in the fertile Eurotas Valley of Laconia, Sparta's power rested not in fleets or debates, but in its soldiers. From a young age, Spartan boys entered the Agog, a rigorous training program designed to produce warriors of unshakable discipline. They lived communally, learned to endure pain, to obey without question, and to fight without fear. The government of Sparta was complex: 2 kings, a council of elders, and an assembly of citizens. But real power lay in the hands of a small elite ruling class. Sparta was deeply conservative, resistant to change and wary of outsiders. Luxury was discouraged. Eloquence was valued only if it served the state. Music and dance existed, but they too were forms of discipline. Where Athens encouraged expression, Sparta demanded restraint. Where Athens sought beauty and knowledge, Sparta sought endurance and order. And yet, both were deeply Greek. Both worshipped the same gods, spoke dialects of the same language, and fought side by side against the Persians at battles like Thermopylae and Plataea. Their rivalry would come to define the Greek world. During the Peloponnesian War, Athens and Sparta stood on opposite sides of a devastating conflict that lasted nearly 3 decades. It was a war not just of armies, but of ideologies. When Sparta finally triumphed, the Greek world was left weakened, fractured, and vulnerable to the rise of new powers. But in their opposition, Athens and Sparta offered a full picture of what ancient Greece could be, a place of light and shadow, of freedom and order, of brilliance and severity. And as you rest, let their stories intertwine, the sea breeze of Athens, the stillness of Spartan fields. And remember that the soul of Greece was never one voice, but a harmony of differences. As the Bronze Age gave way to the so-called Greek Dark Ages around 1100 BCE, the grand palaces of Mycenae and the labyrinthine courts of Knossos crumbled into memory. What followed was not a complete disappearance, but a transformation. In the quiet spaces left behind, seeds were planted that would grow into something wholly new. The polis, the city-state, the defining structure of ancient Greek civilization. To understand Greece is to understand the polis. It was not merely a city in the modern sense, a cluster of homes and markets under a governing body, but a profound expression of identity. Each polis was a community, a homeland, a sacred space, and a political experiment all at once. Athens, Sparta, Corinth, Thebes, Argos, each polis was distinct, yet all shared a common cultural fabric. The origins of the polis lie in a time when kinship groups and tribal associations were the primary units of organization. But as populations grew and trade resumed after the collapse of the Mycenaean world, small settlements began to coalesce around central locations, often hilltops, known as acropolis, which offered protection and visibility. Around these centers, markets, homes, and temples took shape, eventually forming cohesive units with distinct identities. At the heart of each polis was the agora, an open space that served as both a market and a gathering place. Here, citizens would buy and sell goods, exchange news, and engage in public debate. The agora was not just commercial, it was profoundly civic. It was where democracy took root, where laws were discussed, and where the voice of the people was heard. Surrounding the agora were the physical structures that spoke to each polis's soul. Temples dedicated to patron gods or goddesses, administrative buildings, theaters, and gymnasiums. Religion, politics, and daily life intertwined. One could not be a citizen without participating in the rituals of the city, just as one could not worship properly without acknowledging the polis that maintained the temples. Citizenship was a cornerstone of the polis. To be a citizen, a polites, was to hold a privileged place in society. Citizenship was not universal. It was usually reserved for free-born males with local parentage. Women, slaves, and foreigners might live within the polis, contribute to its economy and even its culture. But they were excluded from the political process. Despite its limitations, the polis introduced the idea that governance was a shared responsibility among the people. The rise of the polis also brought with it new political structures. Some city-states embraced oligarchy, rule by a few. Others, like Athens, experimented with democracy. In some, tyrants seized power, not necessarily with cruelty, but as strong individuals who filled power vacuums during times of crisis. Sparta, famously, developed a militarized dual kingship supported by a rigid social hierarchy and a council of elders. These differences were not superficial. They shaped the values, priorities, and destinies of each polis. Sparta prioritized discipline and martial excellence, training its citizens from childhood for war. Athens, by contrast, became a hub of intellectual inquiry and artistic expression. Corinth thrived on trade, leveraging its strategic location to become a wealthy mercantile power. Thebes, often overshadowed by its more famous neighbors, played a central role in many conflicts and shifting alliances. Yet, for all their individuality, the city-states shared a language, a pantheon, and cultural practices. Pan-Hellenic sanctuaries like Delphi and Olympia offered spaces where Greeks from all regions could gather, worship, and compete in athletic contests. The Olympic Games, founded in 776 BCE, were a unifying event, bringing together rivals in peaceful competition and reaffirming a shared Hellenic identity. This unity was tested often. The city-states were fiercely independent, often coming into conflict with one another. Wars were frequent, alliances shifting like sand, and yet, in moments of existential threat, such as during the Persian invasions of the 5th century BCE, the Greeks could rally together. The defense of freedom and autonomy of the polis itself became a cause worth dying for. Education and upbringing within the polis varied, but generally focused on cultivating the virtues deemed necessary for a good citizen. In Athens, boys were taught rhetoric, philosophy, and the arts, preparing them for participation in democratic life. In Sparta, they were molded into soldiers, subjected to rigorous training and discipline in the agage system. The contrast illustrates the breadth of Greek approaches to civic life. Religious life within the polis was also central. Festivals, processions, and sacrifices honored the gods and reinforced communal identity. Each city had its patron deity: Athena in Athens, Apollo in Delphi, Artemis in Ephesus. Temples were not merely places of worship, they were architectural embodiments of civic pride and religious devotion. Their construction required communal effort, funding, and participation, further binding citizens to the city's destiny. The polis also gave rise to monumental developments in law and governance. Laws were increasingly codified, inscribed in public places for all to see. The concept of accountability emerged, with magistrates subject to scrutiny and citizens encouraged to challenge injustice. In Athens, institutions like the Assembly, Ecclesia, the Council of 500, Baula, and the People's Court, Haliaia, reflected a commitment to participatory rule, albeit one still limited by status and gender. Art and culture flourished within the polis. Theaters hosted tragedies and comedies that explored human nature, politics, and the divine. Sculpture celebrated idealized forms and civic heroes. Pottery depicted scenes from daily life and mythology, often with remarkable detail and artistic skill. Music, dance, and poetry were woven into religious festivals and private gatherings alike. Economically, the polis was self-sufficient where possible, but also deeply connected to wider trade networks. Grain, olive oil, wine, pottery, and textiles moved between city-states and across the Mediterranean. This commerce brought prosperity, but also competition. Colonization became a strategy for relieving population pressures and accessing new resources, leading to the founding of Greek settlements from the Black Sea to southern Italy and North Africa. These colonies, though autonomous, maintained strong cultural ties to their mother cities, spreading Hellenic language, religion, and art across vast distances. This process helped define what it meant to be Greek, not merely by blood or geography, but through participation in a shared cultural world. By the 6th century BCE, the polis had become the stage upon which all aspects of Greek life unfolded. It was a space of belonging, of identity, of pride. Its walls enclosed not only buildings, but the collective aspirations of a people. And though the polis would eventually fall to larger empires, Macedonian, Roman, and beyond, its legacy would endure. The very idea that a community could govern itself, that citizens could debate laws, vote on policy, and hold leaders accountable. These ideas, born in the narrow streets and open agoras of Greek polis, continue to shape our world. Thus, the rise of the polis was not a mere architectural or administrative shift. It was a revolution in thought, in belonging, in human potential. From its soil sprang the roots of democracy, philosophy, theater, and civic engagement, and it is from this enduring institution that the legacy of ancient Greece truly begins to shine. As we continue our journey through ancient Greece, let us pause in one of its most iconic and influential city-states, Athens. Nestled between hills and open to the sea, Athens was not merely a city of stone and citizens. It was a pulse in the beating heart of an age. Its legacy stretches far beyond the ruins of the Acropolis or the words of ancient scrolls. Athens, in its golden age, became a symbol of inquiry, of expression, of freedom, and of the human spirit striving to understand itself. To understand Athens is to understand the soul of classical Greece. Unlike many of its neighbors, Athens did not rise to prominence through military conquest or rigid control, but through its ideas and its culture. It drew strength from its people, from their engagement, their curiosity, and their passion for beauty, truth, and debate. The soil of Attica was rocky, the terrain difficult, but from this land rose poets, philosophers, architects, and lawmakers whose influence still resonates. Our story begins in the early stages of Athens, in the shadow of powerful neighbors and mythic tales. The early kings of Athens, such as Theseus, straddle the world of myth and history. Theseus, slayer of the Minotaur and unifier of Attica, stands as a symbolic figure, representing both heroism and civic unity. Whether he truly lived as described or not, the legends reflect the values Athens came to cherish: intelligence over brute strength, community over chaos. In the early archaic period, Athens was ruled by aristocrats, with power concentrated among a few noble families. This oligarchy led to inequality and unrest. The gap between rich and poor widened, and the common people, the demos, began to demand a voice. From this unrest came reformers, the most notable being Solon. Solon, appointed Archon in 594 BCE, enacted sweeping changes. He canceled debts, forbade debt slavery, and reorganized the political system to include broader participation. Though his reforms did not establish democracy as we understand it today, they laid the foundation. Solon was both a poet and a statesman, a man who believed that laws must serve justice, and justice must serve all citizens. Yet Athens's journey toward democracy was not linear. Power continued to shift, and at times strongmen or tyrants took control. Pisistratus, for example, ruled as a benevolent tyrant. He supported the arts, promoted festivals like the Panathenaea, and expanded public works. Under his rule, culture flourished, even if true political freedom did not. But the seeds of democratic governance had been planted, and they would soon bloom. In the late 6th century BCE, Cleisthenes took a bold step forward. Often called the father of Athenian democracy, Cleisthenes reorganized the population into new voting districts, reducing the power of noble families. He established the Council of 500, where citizens could propose and debate laws. The idea that political power should belong not to the few, but to the many, took root. Democracy in Athens was far from perfect by modern standards. Only adult male citizens could participate. Women, slaves, and foreigners were excluded. Yet, within this limited citizenry, the level of engagement was unprecedented. Every citizen had the right, and often the duty, to speak in the assembly. Public offices were chosen by lot, ensuring a rotation of power. Trials were conducted before large juries of ordinary citizens. As Athens grew politically, so too did its cultural life. The 5th century BCE, the classical age, was a period of astonishing achievement. Pericles, a statesman with both vision and eloquence, led Athens during its height. Under his guidance, Athens became a beacon of art, architecture, and thought. It was during this time that the Parthenon rose atop the Acropolis, a temple to Athena Parthenos, the city's patron goddess. Built of marble, adorned with intricate friezes and columns, the Parthenon symbolized the Athenian ideal: balance, proportion, and harmony. It was both a religious sanctuary and a statement of civic pride. In the agora, the public square, citizens mingled, debated, and traded. Philosophers like Socrates walked these paths, asking difficult questions and challenging assumptions. He spoke not from a pulpit, but in conversation, in dialogue, urging people to think critically and live ethically. Socrates taught not for power or fame, but to awaken the soul. His legacy was carried forward by his student Plato, and then by Aristotle. Drama, too, flourished. The theaters of Athens came alive with the works of Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides, and Aristophanes. These playwrights explored themes of fate, justice, war, and the human condition. Theatrical festivals like the Dionysia drew crowds from across the city, offering not just entertainment, but a mirror in which society could examine itself. Athens became a magnet for thinkers, artists, and innovators. Mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and rhetoric all found new expression here. Even amid war and political strife, the pursuit of knowledge and beauty never ceased. But the city was not without its challenges. The Peloponnesian War, a long and bitter conflict with Sparta, tested Athens's strength and ideals. Pericles died during a plague early in the war, and with him passed an era of enlightened leadership. The war drained Athens of resources and spirit. In the end, the city surrendered, its walls torn down, its empire lost. Yet, even in defeat, Athens remained influential. Its schools, its plays, its democratic practices, and its architecture continued to shape the Mediterranean world. Generations to come, Romans, Renaissance thinkers, and modern democracies would look back to Athens for inspiration. To walk through ancient Athens is to walk through the imagination of humankind. It is to hear the echoes of debates in the Knicks, to feel the smooth steps of the Parthenon beneath your feet, to breathe in the ideas that still circulate through our world. As you rest now, imagine the light of the Attic sun over the white stone city, the sound of sandals on marble, and the murmur of thoughtful voices. Athens was not perfect, but it dared to imagine what humans could be. It dared to ask, what is justice? What is beauty? What is the good life? And in those questions, it found a kind of immortality. Let your thoughts drift now with the sea breeze that once touched the sails of Athenian triremes and stirred the olive groves of the Academy. The city may have crumbled in stone, but in spirit it stands eternal. Good night, dear listener, and welcome to Athens. As the 5th century BCE dawned, a transformation took hold of the Greek world, most notably in the city of Athens. This was not merely a time of prosperity or peace. It was a golden age of the mind, spirit, and artistic expression. The classical period of ancient Greece emerged as a beacon of human potential, forever etched into the memory of civilization, and at the heart of this brilliance was Athens, a city that reached for the heights of both thought and beauty. Athens in this period became something more than just a polis. It was an idea, a symbol of what a free-thinking and artistically rich society could accomplish. Following the triumph over the Persians in the early 5th century BCE, especially after the victories at Marathon, Salamis, and Plataea, Athens found itself both confident and unburdened by immediate threats. Under the strategic guidance of leaders like Themistocles and the wise statesmanship of Pericles, Athens embarked on an extraordinary journey, not only of military power, but of civic pride and intellectual illumination. Let us begin by exploring what made this age so distinctive. First and foremost, the very principles of governance and civic life took a profound leap forward. The democratic system, while limited by our modern standards, excluding women, slaves, and non-citizens, was nonetheless revolutionary. Citizens gathered in the ecclesia, the assembly, to debate and vote on crucial matters. In the Boule, a council of 500, citizens were selected by lot to prepare legislative proposals. Even the courts were staffed by large juries of everyday Athenians. Power, once the domain of aristocrats, was now being tested in the hands of the many. Democracy in Athens was more than just a political system. It was a way of life. It shaped the very way people thought about themselves and their role in society. Athenian men took pride in their participation, their right to speak freely, and their duty to uphold the laws of the city. Civic responsibility was not a burden, but a privilege. Orators like Pericles inspired the masses with speeches that captured the imagination and solidified the ideal of democratic participation. Under Pericles' leadership, Athens entered a period of unprecedented cultural growth. He initiated ambitious building programs, funded by the wealth Athens had accumulated through the Delian League, which had originally been formed to continue the fight against Persia. Though controversial, this wealth was now channeled into art, architecture, and philosophy. The Acropolis, once a rugged high ground, was transformed into a glorious display of Athenian pride and piety. Dominating the skyline was the Parthenon, a temple dedicated to the goddess Athena, the city's divine protector. Designed by architects Ectinus and Callicrates and adorned by the sculptor Phidias, the Parthenon was more than just a religious monument. It was a symbol of balance, proportion, and human mastery over chaos. Inside stood a towering statue of Athena, clothed in gold and ivory, her gaze protective and serene. The arts flourished in tandem. Sculpture reached new heights of realism and idealized form. Gone were the rigid poses of the archaic period. In their place came lifelike representations of the human body, dynamic and fluid. Statues like the Discobolus, the discus thrower, by Myron, and the Doriphoros, the spear-bearer, by Polykleitos, embodied both athletic strength and philosophical order. The Greek pursuit of arete, excellence in all things, was made visible in marble and bronze. Drama, too, became a central part of Athenian life. Theatrical festivals, such as the Dionysia, brought citizens together to witness stories of gods and men, tragedy and comedy. Playwrights like Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides explored themes of fate, justice, and human suffering with profound emotional depth. Their plays, performed in the open-air theaters of Athens, were more than entertainment. They were moral and philosophical inquiries. And in the sharp wit of Aristophanes, comedy gave voice to critique, satire, and the absurdities of Athenian life. And then there was philosophy, the crown jewel of Athenian intellectual life. It was in this period that thinkers like Socrates began to reshape the very foundations of human understanding. Rather than offering lectures or doctrines, Socrates engaged in dialogue, asking probing questions that revealed assumptions and forced reflection. He walked barefoot through the streets of Athens, speaking with anyone who would listen, encouraging the examined life. Though he left no writings of his own, his student Plato would preserve and expand upon his ideas. Plato founded the Academy, a place of learning that would shape generations. He sought truths beyond the material world, timeless forms that represented perfect ideals of beauty, justice, and virtue. And from Plato came Aristotle, another towering figure who turned his gaze to the natural world, categorizing, analyzing, and laying the groundwork for logic, ethics, and the sciences. The daily life of Athenians during this period was shaped by a balance of public and private concerns. Men spent their days in the agora, discussing politics, philosophy, or conducting business. Women, largely confined to the home, managed households and raised children, their roles less celebrated but vital. Slavery, though morally troubling by today's standards, was a normalized part of Athenian society, enabling citizens the leisure to pursue politics and the arts. Despite its heights, Athens was not without flaws. The growing dominance it exerted over other Greek states bred resentment. Its use of the Delian League's resources to fund its own grandeur created tensions, particularly with Sparta and its allies. These tensions would eventually lead to the Peloponnesian War, a protracted and devastating conflict that would bring an end to Athens' golden age. Yet, even in its imperfections, classical Athens represents a moment of profound human achievement. It showed what was possible when a society placed value on thought, dialogue, beauty, and civic duty. The echoes of this period resonate still, in our systems of government, in our philosophy, in the theaters we build, and in the questions we ask. As we drift from this chapter in our journey, let the legacy of classical Athens linger in your thoughts. Imagine the white marble gleaming in the sun, the voice of Socrates rising in the marketplace, the chorus on stage whispering truths both ancient and eternal. This was the age of classical brilliance, the heartbeat of ancient Greece. As the golden light of classical Athens began to dim, shadows gathered on the horizon. The very brilliance that elevated Athens to cultural greatness also sowed the seeds of discord. Pride, power, and politics entangled the Greek world in a long and bitter struggle. A war not between nations, but between brothers. This was the Peloponnesian War, a protracted and devastating conflict between Athens and Sparta, and a turning point that marked the end of Greece's most luminous age. To understand the war, we must first understand the tensions that lay beneath the surface of Greek unity. After the Persian Wars, Athens had emerged not only as a defender of freedom, but as the leader of the Delian League, an alliance originally formed to repel future Persian threats. Over time, however, the League transformed into an Athenian empire in all but name. Member states were compelled to contribute ships or money, and dissent was met with force. Athens grew rich and powerful, adorning itself with temples and art funded by its allies. Its navy controlled the Aegean Sea, and its influence extended far beyond Attica. Sparta, on the other hand, remained inward-looking, its society shaped by discipline and simplicity. Its power rested in its army, not its walls or wealth. Sparta led the Peloponnesian League, a rival alliance rooted in traditional values and military strength. The two leagues represented not just different city-states, but different ways of life. Athens, with its democracy and maritime reach, stood in contrast to Sparta's oligarchy and land-based austerity. Their coexistence was uneasy, and over time, suspicion deepened into hostility. The spark that ignited the war came in 431 BCE. Athens had intervened in disputes involving Corinth, a Spartan ally. Tensions escalated, and Sparta, seeing Athenian ambition as a growing threat, declared war. Thus began a conflict that would stretch over nearly 3 decades, reshaping the Greek world and leaving no polis untouched. The war unfolded in phases, each marked by shifting fortunes and profound consequences. In its early years, Pericles adopted a defensive strategy. Athens would shelter behind its long walls, rely on its naval supremacy, and avoid direct confrontation with the superior Spartan army. This plan worked for a time. The Athenian navy raided Peloponnesian coasts, and supplies continued to flow into the city. But then a catastrophe struck from within. In 430 BCE, a plague swept through the crowded city, killing tens of thousands, including Pericles himself. The disease, whose precise nature remains debated, weakened the Athenian spirit and devastated its population. Leadership faltered, and the once disciplined strategy gave way to more aggressive and sometimes reckless decisions. Despite the loss, Athens endured. The war ground on, consuming resources and lives. Alliances shifted, betrayals occurred, and no clear victor emerged. A temporary peace, the Peace of Nicias, was signed in 421 BCE, but it was fragile and short-lived. Skirmishes continued, and trust between Athens and Sparta eroded further. In 415 BCE, Athens embarked on one of the most ambitious and ill-fated campaigns in its history, the Sicilian expedition. Led by Alcibiades, a charismatic and controversial figure, the campaign aimed to conquer Sicily and expand Athenian influence westward. But disaster awaited. Alcibiades defected to Sparta. The Athenian fleet suffered a catastrophic defeat, and thousands of soldiers were lost or enslaved. The Sicilian expedition marked a turning point. Athens's strength was severely weakened, and its enemies emboldened. Sparta, now aided by Persian gold and guided by a shrewd commander named Lysander, built a formidable fleet. Naval battles, once the domain of Athens, began turning in Sparta's favor. In 405 BCE, at the Battle of Aegospotami, the Athenian fleet was destroyed. The following year, Athens was besieged, starved into submission, and forced to surrender. The fall of Athens in 404 BCE marked the end of the Peloponnesian War. Its long walls were torn down, its empire dismantled, and its democracy briefly replaced by an oligarchic regime, the 30 Tyrants. Though democracy was soon restored, the aura of invincibility that once surrounded Athens was gone. Greece had won a war against itself, and, in the process, lost its unity and vitality. The Peloponnesian War left scars that went far beyond the battlefield. Economies were ruined, populations displaced, and trust shattered. The conflict exposed the fragility of Greek alliances and the limits of power. It also raised enduring questions. Can a free society sustain itself in times of prolonged conflict? What happens when ideals clash with ambition? Yet, even in defeat, the spirit of Athens did not vanish. Its thinkers continued to ponder the human condition. Its playwrights and sculptors, even in darker times, found ways to create beauty and provoke reflection. The shadows of war could not extinguish the light of thought. Let this chapter rest with you, like an echo of ancient strife fading into the stillness of the night. The Peloponnesian War was a tragedy in many acts, not just a tale of weapons and walls, but of pride, loss, and the high cost of greatness. As the dust of war settles, we prepare to follow the legacy of Greece beyond Athens, beyond Sparta, to new horizons, where old lessons meet new challenges, and where the flame of Hellenic thought continues to burn. As the golden light of Athens' classical age began to dim, shadows gathered over the Greek world. The very achievements that had elevated Athens to greatness had also sown discord among its neighbors. Wealth, pride, and power brought not only admiration but also envy and fear. And at the heart of this tension stood the two titans of the Greek world, Athens and Sparta. The Peloponnesian War, a protracted and devastating conflict that lasted from 431 to 404 BCE, would not only consume these two great powers, but would also shake the foundations of the Greek world. It was not a war of mere conquest or glory. It was a struggle for supremacy, a clash of ideologies, and a reflection of the fragile nature of human ambition. To understand this conflict, we must begin with the uneasy peace that preceded it. After the Persian Wars, Athens rose to dominance through its leadership of the Delian League. Originally a voluntary alliance against Persian aggression, the League gradually transformed into an Athenian empire in all but name. Tribute flowed into Athens, funding her temples, her navy, and her cultural flowering. Meanwhile, Sparta watched with growing unease, its own Peloponnesian League wary of Athenian intentions. The immediate spark came from disputes between allies and smaller states. Tensions flared in places like Corcyra, Potidaea, and Megara, each a pawn on the wider chessboard of Athenian-Spartan rivalry. When diplomacy failed and grievances piled high, war was declared. The war unfolded in phases. The first, known as the Archidamian War, saw Sparta invade the Athenian countryside, while Athens, under the guidance of Pericles, relied on its naval power and fortified walls. Pericles urged restraint, knowing Athens's strength lay not in open battle, but in endurance. Yet plague ravaged the overcrowded city, killing thousands, including Pericles himself, and sapping morale. Temporary truces came and went, but the underlying tensions never resolved. The Sicilian expedition, a grand Athenian gamble launched in 415 BCE, proved catastrophic. Invading Sicily in hopes of expanding influence, Athens met fierce resistance and poor leadership. The campaign ended in disaster. Ships destroyed, armies captured. It was a turning point from which Athens never truly recovered. Sparta, meanwhile, found unlikely allies in Persia, who supplied ships and funding to counter Athens' naval power. The final phase of the war, the Ionian or Decelean War, saw Athens besieged, starved, and exhausted. In 404 BCE, the once proud city surrendered. Her walls were torn down, her fleet reduced, and her empire dismantled. The Peloponnesian War left scars deeper than physical ruin. It shattered the illusion of unity among the Greeks, proving that even the greatest ideals could crumble under the weight of ambition and fear. The intellectual and artistic brilliance of the classical age gave way to uncertainty and introspection. Playwrights grew darker, philosophers more cynical. The war had not only broken bodies and cities, it had challenged the very soul of Hellas. Yet from this devastation came new questions, new voices. As you let this chapter settle, think of the ruins left behind, not only of buildings, but of dreams. Think of the lesson buried in the dust, that greatness is fragile, and peace is a gift easily lost. Close your eyes and imagine the silence after the storm, the empty agora, the hushed harbor, the cold stones where once ideals stood tall. This was the Peloponnesian War, and it changed Greece forever. The death of Alexander the Great in 323 BCE marked the end of an extraordinary era of conquest and the beginning of a new chapter in Greek history. The Hellenistic Age. This period, spanning roughly 3 centuries until the rise of Rome, witnessed a profound transformation in the Greek world. The political landscape fractured, but Greek culture expanded farther than ever before, intertwining with the customs, languages, and beliefs of diverse peoples from Egypt to India. In this chapter, we will explore the sweeping changes of the Hellenistic period, its dynasties and cities, its philosophies and sciences, its art and religion. Though the classical polis had faded into the background, the legacy of Greece found fresh soil in which to grow, producing a new, cosmopolitan identity that echoed across continents. Let us begin with Alexander's vast empire. At the time of his death in Babylon, Alexander had not designated a clear heir. His generals, the Diadochi, quickly fell into conflict, each vying for control over different portions of the empire. From this turmoil emerged 3 dominant kingdoms: the Ptolemaic dynasty in Egypt, the Seleucid Empire in Asia, and the Antigonid dynasty in Macedonia. These Hellenistic monarchies maintained Greek cultural institutions while ruling over diverse populations. The Ptolemies, ruling from Alexandria, fostered an extraordinary intellectual climate. The Library of Alexandria, one of the greatest repositories of ancient knowledge, drew scholars from every corner of the known world. Mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and literary criticism all flourished. Figures like Euclid, who systematized geometry, and Eratosthenes, who calculated the Earth's circumference with remarkable accuracy, exemplify the era's scientific brilliance. In the Seleucid Empire, Greek and Eastern traditions blended. Cities like Antioch and Seleucia became centers of commerce and learning. Greek language and customs spread, but often coexisted with local traditions. This blending, or syncretism, became a hallmark of the Hellenistic age. Gods merged, philosophies adapted, and artists experimented with new forms and subjects. One of the most striking features of this period was the growth of urban life. Cities, or poleis, remained central, but they were no longer the autonomous units of the classical period. Instead, they served as nodes in larger networks of trade and administration. In places like Pergamon, Rhodes, and Ephesus, monumental architecture testified to civic pride and royal patronage. Theaters, gymnasia, temples, and marketplaces remained vital to civic identity. Art and sculpture evolved as well. The serene idealism of the classical era gave way to dynamic movement, emotional expression, and intricate detail. The Laocoon group, for instance, captures agony and struggle in a way earlier art did not. Artists began to explore everyday life and depict people of different ages, ethnicities, and social backgrounds, reflecting the diverse realities of a more interconnected world. Philosophy, too, adapted to new realities. In a world no longer dominated by the polis, schools of thought turned inward. Stoicism, founded by Zeno of Citium, taught the value of self-discipline and acceptance of fate. Epicureanism, developed by Epicurus, emphasized the pursuit of modest pleasures and freedom from fear. Skepticism questioned the possibility of certain knowledge. These philosophies offered personal solace in a time of political instability and uncertainty. Religion underwent profound changes. The Olympian gods remained important, but new deities gained prominence. Egyptian cults, such as those of Isis and Serapis, spread throughout the Hellenistic world. Mystery religions, offering initiates personal salvation and a deeper spiritual connection, gained popularity. Astrology and oracles flourished, reflecting a hunger for meaning in a rapidly changing world. Women, though still constrained by patriarchal norms, found new opportunities in the Hellenistic period. Royal women, such as Cleopatra VII of Egypt, wielded political power. In cities, women could sponsor temples, participate in religious festivals, and, in some cases, own property or manage estates. While not a revolution, these shifts reflect subtle changes in gender roles within the cosmopolitan society. The Hellenistic world was also one of vibrant exchange. Goods, ideas, and people moved across vast distances. Greek became the lingua franca, facilitating communication across cultures. Coins bore Greek inscriptions and Hellenistic imagery. Ships carried grain from Egypt, spices from Arabia, and silk from Asia. Traders, mercenaries, artists, and scholars journeyed across borders, weaving a web of cultural interconnection. Education expanded. Gymnasia and schools taught literature, rhetoric, philosophy, and sciences. Children of elite families, Greek and non-Greek alike, were steeped in Hellenic learning. This education served not just as cultural refinement, but as a ticket to administrative positions in royal courts and city governments. Despite this flourishing, the Hellenistic world faced growing tensions. Internal revolts, dynastic struggles, and external threats strained the kingdoms. Rome, rising in the west, began to cast its shadow. Through diplomacy and war, it gradually absorbed the Hellenistic realms. The decisive moment came in 31 BCE at the Battle of Actium, where Octavian defeated Mark Antony and Cleopatra. Egypt became a Roman province, and with it, the Hellenistic age formally ended. Yet its influence endured. Roman art, literature, and philosophy were deeply shaped by Hellenistic models. Cities built by Alexander and his successors continued to thrive under Roman rule. Greek remained a language of culture and administration in the Eastern Roman Empire for centuries. The Hellenistic age had sown seeds that would blossom long after its political structures had vanished. As we reflect on this remarkable era, let us remember it not merely as a time of transition, but as a time of expansion, of ideas, of identities, and of horizons. The world became wider, more complex, more connected, and through that complexity, the spirit of Greece found new ways to endure. As the centuries turned and the Mediterranean world evolved, Greece, once the proud mother of democracy, philosophy, and art, found itself facing a new and rising power. Rome. The encounter between these two great civilizations was not a simple conquest nor a total collapse. Rather, it was a gradual, complex fusion of cultures, politics, and ideals. A transformation that would ultimately embed Greek thought deep into the heart of Roman identity, and thus into the very soul of the Western world. By the late 3rd century BCE, Greece had endured decades of internal strife. The once mighty city-states had grown weary from endless conflict. The Peloponnesian War had left its scars, and the Hellenistic kingdoms, born from Alexander's legacy, were fractured by intrigue and ambition. In this climate of division and vulnerability, Rome's expanding shadow loomed ever larger. Rome did not arrive with immediate conquest. First came diplomacy, then alliances, often forged under pressure or necessity. Rome positioned itself as a protector of Greek liberty, intervening in disputes between rival leagues and city-states. But behind its banners of peace lay strategic ambition. When the Roman legions did march, they did so with purpose and overwhelming force. The Macedonian Wars, waged across the 3rd and 2nd centuries BCE, saw the once proud kingdom of Philip V and his son Perseus brought low by Roman discipline and determination. In 146 BCE, the city of Corinth, a jewel of the Greek world, was razed by Roman forces, and with it, the illusion of Greek autonomy was shattered. Greece was now a province of the Roman Republic, later to be absorbed into the vast empire that would span continents. Yet, though conquered, Greece was never culturally defeated. Rome might have worn the laurel of victory, but it was Greece that crowned it with wisdom. Greek art, literature, philosophy, and education became the foundation of Roman intellectual life. Wealthy Roman families hired Greek tutors for their children. Sculptors, poets, and architects drew upon Hellenistic traditions. Temples and public buildings in Rome echoed the columns of the Parthenon. Even the pantheon of Roman gods mirrored the Olympians, albeit under Latin names. Philosophy, particularly the teachings of Plato, Aristotle, and the Stoics, found eager disciples among Roman elites. Cicero, Seneca, and Marcus Aurelius engaged deeply with Greek thought, integrating it into their own writings and decisions. The fusion was so complete that to be truly Roman, one had to know Greece. Yet, for the Greeks, life under Roman rule was a mixed experience. Cities like Athens retained their status as cultural centers, attracting students and philosophers from across the empire. The games, festivals, and rituals of old continued, though often sponsored or overseen by Roman magistrates. There was pride in the preservation of tradition, but also a quiet sorrow, a longing for the days when Greece stood unshaken. Still, Greece adapted. The resilience of its people and the enduring allure of its legacy ensured that even under the eagle's shadow, the Greek spirit burned brightly. In the marketplaces and libraries, in the whispers of poets and the questions of philosophers, the soul of Hellas lived on. As you drift deeper into this reflection, consider the paradox of this chapter, that conquest need not extinguish culture. Sometimes it spreads it wider. Rome conquered Greece, but in many ways Greece conquered Rome. Let this thought settle with you. The marble ruins, the columns, the quiet hills of the Peloponnese, all remember, and in your dreams tonight they may rise again. We will continue our journey soon toward the twilight of the ancient world and the lasting legacy Greece left behind. As the brilliance of classical Greece gave way to the seismic shifts of empire, a new chapter unfolded in the Greek world, one marked by the spread of Hellenic culture far beyond the familiar shores of the Aegean. This was the era of the Hellenistic world, a period that began with the conquests of Alexander the Great and extended for nearly 3 centuries thereafter, weaving Greek language, art, and ideas into the very fabric of Asia, Africa, and the Near East. The world that emerged in the wake of Alexander's campaigns was one of vast territories and cosmopolitan cities, where Greek traditions mingled with local customs. It was no longer a world of independent polis, but of kingdoms ruled by dynasties, of great metropolises that stood as symbols of a new and blended civilization. Let us begin with the figure who stands at the threshold of this transformation. Alexander of Macedon. Educated by Aristotle and raised in a court that valued both Greek culture and military discipline, Alexander inherited the throne from his father, Philip II, who had already begun the unification of the Greek world. Alexander's ambitions, however, reached far beyond the borders of Greece. In a decade of relentless conquest, he toppled the Persian Empire, reached as far as India, and founded dozens of cities, many of which bore his name. But Alexander was not merely a conqueror. He envisioned a world where Greek and non-Greek might blend, a vision reflected in his policy of intermarriage, the establishment of mixed communities, and the promotion of Greek as a lingua franca. Though his empire fractured after his untimely death in 323 BCE, the seeds he planted took root, growing into a new era of cultural flourishing. The Hellenistic world was defined by the kingdoms that emerged from the division of Alexander's empire. The Ptolemies in Egypt, the Seleucids in Persia and Mesopotamia, and the Antigonids in Macedon. Each of these dynasties adopted aspects of both Greek and local traditions, creating hybrid cultures that bore the imprint of Alexander's dream. In Egypt, the city of Alexandria rose as a beacon of learning and culture. Founded by Alexander and developed under the Ptolemies, it became home to the legendary Library of Alexandria, a repository of knowledge that sought to gather the wisdom of the entire known world. Scholars from across the Mediterranean traveled to study there, making contributions to astronomy, mathematics, medicine, and philosophy. Figures like Euclid, Archimedes, and Eratosthenes advanced human understanding in ways that continue to shape our world today. Greek art, too, underwent a transformation in this period. While classical sculpture had aimed for idealized perfection, Hellenistic artists embraced emotion, realism, and movement. Statues such as the Laocoon group or the Winged Victory of Samothrace captured not only the human form, but the human experience. Pain, triumph, struggle, and grace. Theatricality and individual expression replaced the serene detachment of earlier works. Cities became the heart of Hellenistic life. Cosmopolitan and diverse, they housed not only Greeks but also Egyptians, Persians, Jews, and others, living together in intricate social mosaics. Greek remained the language of administration and culture, but religious practices, architectural styles, and daily customs reflected a complex interweaving of traditions. Philosophy, too, adapted to the new realities. The old civic-focused schools gave way to more personal, inward-looking paths. Epicureanism, founded by Epicurus, taught that tranquility could be achieved through simple pleasures and the absence of pain. Stoicism, developed by Zeno of Citium, encouraged rational control of emotions and living in harmony with nature and fate. These philosophies spoke to individuals navigating the uncertainties of a vast and changing world. Religion in the Hellenistic period also evolved. The old Olympian gods remained, but new cults and mystery religions emerged, offering personal salvation and emotional connection. Egyptian deities like Isis were worshipped alongside Dionysus, while Zoroastrian and Babylonian influences filtered into spiritual practices. This was a time of syncretism, where belief systems blended and adapted, reflecting the pluralistic character of the age. Despite its many achievements, the Hellenistic world was not without challenges. Political instability was frequent, and the ambitions of rival dynasties often led to conflict. Economic disparity grew as wealth concentrated in the hands of rulers and elites. Yet, amid these tensions, the flow of ideas and the flourishing of arts and sciences persisted, testament to the enduring appeal of Greek cultural forms. The Hellenistic age eventually gave way to Roman dominance. By the 1st century BCE, much of the Hellenistic world had been absorbed into the Roman Republic, and later the Roman Empire. Yet the Greek legacy did not vanish. On the contrary, it became the bedrock of Roman education, art, and thought. The Romans admired Greek philosophy, imitated Greek architecture, and preserved many of its texts and traditions. In this way, the spirit of Hellenism lived on, not only in Rome, but in the broader currents of Western civilization. As you drift at the edge of sleep, picture a world where marble temples rose beside desert pyramids, where philosophers debated under palm trees, and where the echoes of Homer mingled with the chants of Eastern priests. The Hellenistic world was a world of convergence, of East and West, old and new, the familiar and the strange. In this chapter of the Greek story, we see the expansion of culture beyond its birthplace, carried by conquerors and scholars, sculptors and kings. It is a reminder that ideas are not bound by borders, and that the legacy of a civilization can live on in faraway lands, long after its political power has faded. Let the grandeur of this age rest gently in your thoughts as you drift deeper into sleep. The Hellenistic world, vibrant and varied, awaits in your dreams. As the classical age gave way to the Hellenistic era, and eventually fell under the growing shadow of Rome, the legacy of ancient Greece did not disappear. Rather, it transformed, absorbed, interpreted, and reimagined by those who followed. The culture, philosophy, and innovations of the Greeks did not simply remain in their time. They journeyed onward, carried by the winds of history, echoing through centuries and shaping the foundations of the modern world. Let us begin with the intellectual inheritance. Greek thought, especially the teachings of Plato and Aristotle, became cornerstones of Western philosophy. Through the work of Roman scholars and, later, medieval Islamic thinkers, Greek philosophy survived the turbulence of time. Translations into Arabic and Latin allowed ideas first spoken in the Agora of Athens to reach the libraries of Baghdad and the monasteries of Europe. When the Renaissance dawned, it did so with the rebirth of classical knowledge. The rediscovery of Greek texts served as the spark that reignited curiosity, reason, and art across the continent. The political experiments of Greece, especially Athenian democracy, also left a mark. Though flawed and limited by modern standards, the very notion that citizens could govern themselves planted a seed that would flourish millennia later. The democratic ideals of participation, debate, and civic responsibility found new life in Enlightenment thought and eventually in the constitutions of modern nations. When American and French revolutionaries looked for models, they looked to Greece. Greek literature and drama continued to inspire. The tragedies of Sophocles and Euripides, the comedies of Aristophanes, these were not relics but living works, performed and adapted across ages. Their themes, the struggle with fate, the tension between duty and desire, the search for justice, remained universal. Even today, the theater owes much to the Greek tradition, not only in form and structure, but in the very idea that drama can explore the human condition. Art and architecture, too, left a lasting imprint. The clean lines, symmetry, and proportion of Greek temples became the standard for beauty and balance. From Roman basilicas to neoclassical government buildings, the influence is unmistakable. The image of a columned temple atop a hill, like the Parthenon, became a visual metaphor for civilization itself. Science and mathematics, as fostered by Greek minds like Euclid, Archimedes, and Hippocrates, established methods and principles that endure in modern education and inquiry, geometry, medicine, astronomy. These fields trace their roots to Greek thought, grounded in observation, logic, and the pursuit of knowledge for its own sake. Religion and mythology, while no longer followed as belief systems, remain part of the cultural fabric. The myths of Olympus, the trials of Heracles, the Odyssey of Odysseus. These stories continue to be retold in literature, film, and art. They offer timeless archetypes: the hero, the trickster, the doomed lover. And through them, we glimpse not only Greek culture, but the shared dreams and fears of humanity. But perhaps the greatest legacy of Greece lies not in any single achievement, but in its spirit. A restless curiosity, a love of beauty, a commitment to discourse and debate. The Greeks asked questions. What is the good life? What is justice? What is the nature of reality? These questions did not end with them. They passed them on. In schools and universities, in courts and theaters, in galleries and city squares, the dialogue continues. Greece gave the world not just answers, but the habit of seeking them. It lit a flame that still burns quietly in the mind of every thinker, artist, and dreamer. As we conclude our journey through ancient Greece, let us carry this spirit with us. Let us remember that history is not just a record of what was, but a guide for what might be. The columns may crumble, the marble may fade, but the ideas endure. So rest now, gentle traveler. Let the echoes of Greece lull you to sleep. In your dreams, walk once more beneath the olive trees, hear the whisper of the Aegean waves, and listen for the voices of philosophers in the distance. The story of Greece is not over. It lives on, in you, as we move into the final chapter of our journey through ancient Greece. We step into a world transformed by ambition, conquest, and the enduring influence of Hellenic thought. The classical period, with its city-states and intellectual ferment, was giving way to something new. A broader, more cosmopolitan world born from the dreams of one man, Alexander the Great. Born in 356 BCE in the kingdom of Macedon, Alexander was the son of King Philip II and Queen Olympias. Though Macedon was often looked down upon by the southern Greeks as a rough and uncultured land, Philip had forged a powerful and disciplined army, uniting the fractious Greek city-states under his hegemony. Alexander, raised on stories of Achilles and tutored by none other than Aristotle, was destined for greatness. When Philip was assassinated in 336 BCE, the 20-year-old Alexander took the throne. In less than 2 decades, he would redraw the map of the known world. His conquests carried him from the Aegean to Egypt, across Mesopotamia and Persia, and into the distant reaches of India. In every city he passed, Greek culture took root. New cities, many bearing his name, rose up with theaters, agoras, and gymnasia. Greek became the lingua franca of a vast and diverse empire. But Alexander's legacy was not just in territory. It was cultural. It was philosophical. It was scientific. This was the dawn of the Hellenistic era, a period marked by the blending of Greek traditions with those of Egypt, Persia, and the wider East. It was an age of synthesis, where local gods were identified with Greek ones, where Eastern rulers styled themselves as Greek kings, and where the boundaries of identity and thought became more fluid. Alexandria in Egypt, founded by Alexander himself, became the beating heart of this new world. Its great library sought to collect all the knowledge of humanity. Scholars gathered there to study mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy. Euclid formulated his geometry. Archimedes laid the foundations of physics. Eratosthenes calculated the circumference of the earth with stunning accuracy. The city stood as a testament to the enduring thirst for knowledge that Greek culture had nurtured. In art and sculpture, the Hellenistic style became more emotional, dynamic, and personal, where the classical period had idealized beauty and balance. Hellenistic artists embraced drama, movement, and individual expression. The Laocoon group, with its twisting forms and anguished faces, captures the intense pathos of this new age. Philosophy, too, evolved. In a world now vast and uncertain, thinkers sought peace of mind more than political engagement. Stoicism, founded by Zeno of Citium, taught the value of self-control and virtue in accordance with nature. Epicureanism, founded by Epicurus, emphasized the pursuit of simple pleasures and the avoidance of pain. These schools of thought offered solace in a rapidly changing world. Religion adapted as well. Mystery cults flourished, blending Greek gods with Eastern deities. People sought personal salvation, spiritual insight, and a deeper connection with the divine. The lines between myth, philosophy, and faith began to blur, setting the stage for new religious movements in the centuries to come. Though the political power of the Greek city-states waned, their culture endured. The Hellenistic kingdoms, the Seleucid Empire in Asia, the Ptolemaic dynasty in Egypt, and others, carried forward Greek ideals even as they adapted to local traditions. The Greek spirit lived on in architecture, in learning, and in the enduring belief that human reason could unlock the secrets of the cosmos. As we close the chapter on ancient Greece, we see a legacy that stretches far beyond the shores of the Aegean. The thoughts of Plato and Aristotle would shape medieval and modern philosophy. The dramas of Sophocles and Euripides would echo through the theaters of Europe. The columns of the Parthenon would inspire architects for millennia, and the questions first asked in the agora would continue to stir minds across the world. Ancient Greece may be gone, but it is not lost. It is alive in the words we speak, the ideas we cherish, and the stories we tell. Let that legacy accompany you now, a quiet companion in your thoughts, a whisper from an age of wonder. Sleep well, and dream of marble cities beneath a golden sun, where gods once walked among men, and wisdom flowed like water from mountain springs. As the final notes of the classical symphony of ancient Greece faded, they gave way not to silence, but to a grand, sweeping new composition. The Hellenistic Age. This chapter in Greek history begins not in Athens or Sparta, but in the wind-swept plains of Macedonia, where a young and brilliant commander named Alexander ascended to the throne. With his rise came a new vision of Greek identity, no longer bounded by the Aegean Sea or rooted in the Polis, but extended across empires, languages, and continents. The Hellenistic period, which followed the conquests of Alexander the Great and extended roughly from 323 BCE to the rise of Rome in the 1st century BCE, saw Greek culture carried far beyond its traditional heartlands, from the deserts of Egypt to the mountains of Persia, from the shores of the Mediterranean to the banks of the Indus River. Greek ideas, art, and language spread like a tide, leaving behind a vibrant blend of cultures that would shape the ancient world for centuries. Let us begin with Alexander himself, the architect of this transformation. Tutored by Aristotle and inspired by the heroic epics of Homer, Alexander combined classical ideals with imperial ambition. After uniting the Greek city-states under Macedonian rule, he turned his gaze eastward, leading a campaign that would dismantle the Persian Empire and extend Greek influence as far as India. Yet Alexander was not only a conqueror, he envisioned a new world, where Greek and non-Greek peoples might share in a cosmopolitan cultural exchange. He founded more than 20 cities, most notably Alexandria in Egypt, which became centers of Hellenistic life. These cities were not merely military outposts or administrative hubs. They were vibrant metropolises where Greek settlers mingled with local populations, sharing language, religion, art, and governance. The result was a dynamic, multicultural world. A world where a Greek could worship Egyptian gods, where Eastern philosophies were debated in Greek dialects, and where scientific discoveries flourished. The cultural flowering of the Hellenistic Age was both a continuation and a transformation of the classical legacy. The arts, for example, moved away from the idealized forms of the classical period to embrace realism and emotion. Hellenistic sculpture depicted not only gods and athletes, but also children, the elderly, and even the grotesque. The famous Laocoon group, with its writhing figures and tortured expressions, captures the intense drama and human complexity of the time. Philosophy also evolved. While classical Athens had focused on civic virtue and metaphysical inquiry, Hellenistic philosophers turned inward, asking how individuals could find peace in a turbulent world. Schools like the Stoics and the Epicureans emerged, offering paths to tranquility through self-discipline or the pursuit of modest pleasures. The Cynics rejected materialism altogether, advocating for a life in harmony with nature, while the skeptics questioned whether truth could ever truly be known. Science and scholarship flourished as well, particularly in the city of Alexandria. Its great library, an ambitious attempt to collect all human knowledge, became a beacon for scholars from across the Mediterranean. Here, thinkers such as Euclid developed the foundations of geometry, while Archimedes, though based in Syracuse, contributed pioneering work in physics and engineering. In medicine, Herophilos and Erasistratus conducted anatomical studies that would influence physicians for centuries. The political world of the Hellenistic age was fragmented but interconnected. Following Alexander's death in 323 BCE, his empire was divided among his generals, forming the Hellenistic kingdoms of the Ptolemies in Egypt, the Seleucids in Persia and Mesopotamia, and the Antigonids in Macedonia and Greece. These dynasties ruled as monarchs, blending Greek and local traditions. Royal courts became patrons of the arts and sciences, and rulers often styled themselves as divine or semi-divine, merging Hellenic and Eastern imagery to reinforce their legitimacy. Religion during this era also reflected a fusion of traditions. The Greek pantheon remained central, but it adapted to local contexts. In Egypt, for instance, the god Serapis was created as a syncretic deity, combining Greek and Egyptian elements. Mystery cults, such as those of Isis or Mithras, gained popularity, offering initiates personal salvation and a more emotional religious experience. Meanwhile, astrology and the belief in a cosmic order gained ground, reflecting both Eastern influences and a growing fascination with fate. Despite the dazzling achievements of the Hellenistic world, it was also a time of political instability and social tension. The vast empires often faced revolts, and the rural populations sometimes felt alienated from the urban centers of power. Greek colonists formed elites in many cities, while native peoples were often marginalized. Yet, even in this fractured political landscape, trade and communication linked the Hellenistic realms together, creating a shared cultural fabric that transcended borders. Ultimately, the Hellenistic age came to an end not through collapse, but through absorption. The growing power of Rome gradually overshadowed the Greek kingdoms, culminating in the conquest of Egypt in 30 BCE following the death of Cleopatra VII. Yet even as Roman legions marched across the Hellenistic world, they adopted and preserved much of its culture. Greek remained the language of scholarship and diplomacy in the Eastern Mediterranean, and Roman education, art, and philosophy were deeply indebted to Greek predecessors. The legacy of the Hellenistic age is thus not confined to its own era. It lives on in the principles of scientific inquiry, in the philosophical quests for inner peace, in the artistic celebration of the human experience, and in the very idea of a cosmopolitan world enriched by cultural exchange. This was Greece not as a land, but as a legacy, a seed sown across time and space. And so, as we close our journey through the wonders of ancient Greece, let the echoes of this remarkable civilization linger. From the myths of Olympus to the dialogues of Plato, from the battles of Marathon to the libraries of Alexandria, Greece offers us not just a history, but a mirror, a way to reflect on who we are, where we come from, and what we value. May these whispers of marble and parchment, of lyre and theater, accompany you into sleep and into dreams where gods still walk among mortals, and wisdom is as close as a question asked in the quiet of the soul.